So yeah, I wanted to talk about the MVP race and the conceptuality behind it. And it's this year, I'm thinking about it more than most because I'm doing Bleacher Report's MVP ladder every other week, and it is fucking difficult more than it has been in years past. And I have like this is like an eightfold question, but it's like, is it designed the way that this award is set up? So we almost have to put other players down to make our case for another. And my other like it's kind of separate, but how much do we factor in supporting cast? Because I think a lot of people have been, well, Luka should win it this year because we gave it to Jokic last year since he did so much with minimal supporting help, and that's what Luka is doing now. And I don't know what to make of it. Is there a way to fix either of these two things that I'm highlighting? Like, should the quality of your supporting cast matter? Is there a way to make the discourse in general more healthy and less ambiguous? Does there need to be a set of criteria? And so I want to start with, I guess, where you land on the supporting cast. Like, how much are you factoring that element into these discussions? And also, I've written about it a bunch, but like, I haven't even asked you who's your MVP right now. So that might clue me in as to what you're thinking. But how do you treat that? But look, because people aren't wrong. If you voted for Nikola Jokic last year only because he dragged this unimpressive supporting cast or a supporting cast that was missing two of its best players to respectability, and now you're not going to do the same for Luka, I guess that is hypocritical, but there's also so much more that goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who it's it to me. I was going to ask you, but I'll just say like I think it's Luka and Jokic, and not even necessarily in that order. And there's not really anybody else at the moment that I would
The Kevin
seriously
Durant and Steph
consider.
injuries changed the
Yeah,
trajectory of the MVP race for sure. Yeah.
and I just think I don't know what Embiid would have to do to crack that top two because he's playing. I mean, again, like he might finish second. Well, he's probably not finishing second unless there's an injury, but he's going to finish third potentially. And then he may go down as just the best player to never win an MVP. That's totally plausible. But it's
Wow.
those two. And so, like, parsing the difference between those two guys, there's actually kind of a lot of similarities in terms of just how integral they are to their teams. Whether you're looking at on-off stuff, which basically everything favors Jokic, I think, in terms of advanced metrics and on-off impact and all that other stuff. So supporting cast is like it cuts both ways because it needs to be good enough for your team to be relevant in like a top 3, top 4 in your conference. And to just take another point of comparison, like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is, you know, he's not on the level of Doncic and Jokic, but he's only ever going to be kind of a, well, let's talk about him, but he's not going to win an MVP if the Thunder are 10th, which they are now, or even if they're 6th or 7th, I don't think. And it's not because of him. I mean, it's because the supporting cast isn't good enough to get the team there. The obvious other thing is, well, look at what this guy's carrying this team, right? And like that is sometimes compelling. So there is no answer. And that's the problem with MVP. And I think that's almost a feature and not a bug, is that the definition of value does not exist in most valuable player. And so you can come at it from however you want to. I think that does, what that leads to is some people looking at a season and the players participating in it and viewing the MVP as a completely different thing from other people, because just we're gonna differ on what we think is valuable. Because and even if you're trying to take pieces of everything, you know, well, where is he in Raptor and estimated plus minus? What's his box plus minus? What's the on off? Well, how good are his teammates? Where is his team in the standings? Like, just what is his role in the offense independent of production? Like, and also defense never tends to matter. That's, I think, the one thing we all agree on, is that that's just like a, well, we can talk about defense if we need to split hairs, but it's never going to be one of the top 5 or 10 things we care about.
Yeah.
So I think it's just going to be a debate, because, and it's almost designed to be that way because nobody agrees on what valuable is. The last thing that I really am interested in, the first thing you brought up was, do we need to, like, because if we're going to organize something in a ranking setup, you sort of have to shit on the people that are below the person above them to justify the argument. I'm having that with I'm doing our all-star predictions for Bleacher Report. And it's like, there's a section for snubs. And like, so what do I do in that section? Do I say why this guy, who's obviously a great player, is not an all-star? Do I have to point out all the flaws? And like, sometimes you do, because otherwise you just say nice things about everyone and don't explain what the differences are. So it's just kind of going to come with it. I think ideally you want to just pump up the person that's highest on the list and then try to do the same for everybody. But if you're making an argument of why one player is above another, I don't know how you do that without saying, well, here's a problem for the guy that's ranked second and then third and on down, and why they don't measure up. So, I don't know how you get around that. If you ever figure that out, let me know, because you don't want to be having to dump on guys that you're like, for you, you're saying this guy is having one of the 5 or 10 best seasons in the league. It's kind of like a tough look to say, well, his true shooting percentage is only this high above league average, therefore he's bad. Like that's a tough place to be.
I've defaulted to just like, I'm making my case for the player and it's independent of everyone else, but there does need to be some cross comparison there, because you have to get into, well, why is it Jokic instead of Luka, or vice versa? Or
Right.
why is it, and I think some people kind of find not refuge, but they try to inoculate themselves against the critiques by saying, well, best player in the best team. And so I guess if you're defaulting to that, like, there's your cover. You don't have to worry about sort of arguing anything else. I just don't I don't look at value in that way. And so I'm almost wondering, like, would it benefit there for being like some sort of set criteria? Or if they came with like, do they need a separate like best player award versus most valuable? Or would that sort of like, is that dilute the conversation too much? Sort of how we have like, now we have the most clutch player in the league award. And it's like that's kind of cute and cool, but is there too many awards at some point? And then would that, sort of diminish the value and appeal of actually having the MVP if there's also a best player? Which one actually means more? And how does that change discourse moving forward, where it's like, oh, so-and-so has this many best player awards, but so-and-so has this many MVPs? And is there ever a season where the player is one and the same? What is really the difference there? I don't have an answer. That's why I just honestly don't have an answer. I think it comes down to personal preference as to what you like value or how you interpret value. And I think a lot of that can be done, especially now, is while you're looking at, well, look at how much they're uplifting a team that would be so bad without them. When I do think it's important to distinguish, like, well, look how much they're uplifting a team that would be pretty good without them, and yet they're still making this massive difference, which is why I think, a case like Jokic's this season is stronger than it was last year, because here he is with this better supporting cast, and he's still uplifting the Nuggets, if you just want to look at on-off splits, by more points per 100 possessions when he's on the court than a Luka, compared to when like the Dallas's shitty supporting cast, if that's how you want to frame it, is on the floor. I'm not saying that makes Jokic the MVP. He has been number one in my past two ladders, so I want to make that clear, full disclosure. But I'm not going to claim to have this is something I thought about, because I honestly just do not have the answer.
So I think I was trying to think about like what it would look like if we had clear criteria where this wouldn't be it, but it's just take an advanced catch-all, all in one stat, and just whoever leads in that stat is the MVP. And certainly if that were the case, it would be Jokic running away, depending, like almost regardless of which catch-all you used. But I think it should be some of that, because that's going to remove a lot of the bias, a lot of the sort of, subjectivity involved in it. What's interesting to me though is, and there's been a bunch of research, and it just feels true anecdotally, that it's just much harder to take a team from, say, like 46 wins to 56 than it is to go from like 30 to 45, because just it's harder to go good to great than it is, decent to good. And so in a way, the best player on the best team argument, it's too simplistic, but it almost does sort of accidentally get at the fact and the compelling fact that it just matters more if a player can elevate a team, at a higher level, maybe by the same increment in terms of like wins in the standings. But it does account, the best player on the best team idea does account for what's a much more complicated and sort of, maybe not even intuitive fact that it's just really hard to be the reason a team is great. And it's not quite as hard to be the reason a team is good, even if, from outside feels like those should sort of, it shouldn't matter because we're just attributing the good to great bounce being from a better supporting cast or whatever, when probably it's this really great player that's making the supporting cast look better than it is, or at least that's something to be considered. So I think, to wrap it, I think actually, even though we all disagree and even though it's thorny and it's like difficult and the criteria sort of don't exist, I don't feel like we get MVP like really wrong almost ever. It tends to be, well, it should have been like this one other guy, like the Derrick Rose season. I think, you know, there, or any season that LeBron didn't win it in his prime. There probably, people think there's a Dwight Howard MVP in there somewhere, but it's not like, you know, neither of the last 2 years, I think, should anyone be freaking out that Jokic won it. It's a little weird because of the lack of playoff success, but I don't think, and even this year, if Jokic or Luka wins it, is it realistic that someone is where they are now? Is it realistic that someone's going to say this is a travesty? Like, we get it pretty close, even though the way we get there, like, I don't think anybody agrees on how you do it.
Which I think it's ultimately fine. I just wish we acknowledged how difficult it was, or how open-ended it was more, or even just how there might just be multiple correct or okay answers in any given scene. Like the whole Drew Hanlon, like, yeah, he's going to cape for his guy, but where he's like being such a fucking dickhead about the way he goes about campaigning for Joel Embiid. Like that stuff is just cringy, and it still does annoy me. Let's not saying that we're operating on this higher level, but like, I do think there's value in just saying, hey, this is hard. It's open for interpretation. Maybe we're wrong. I'm not trying to be an absolutist about it. And like you said, it does feel like we get it. Maybe not even if we get it right, but like we don't get it overly wrong
right
every single season, where even if there's 2 or 3 correct, like last year where it could have been Jokic, Embiid, or Giannis, probably. If it wasn't Jokic, like, and Jokic was my pick, like I'm not going to quibble about it. There will be people though that think it's a travesty if Jokic wins it again, because they'll say, oh, he's with Wilt, Bill Russell, and Larry Bird, the only 3-time MVPs. That just looks off. And it's like, well, why? Jokic is on pace to just be like one of the greatest players of all time. Right. That's okay to say. So there is no, like, I don't have a solution to this. I just wish that the discourse was less absolutist when people are making a case for their choice, where it's, you know, I have people, there's someone I mentioned the other day saying like, well, Luka is clearly the runaway favorite. And I was like, if you think there's a runaway favorite in this MVP, this was pre-Durant injury, I think. If you think Luka is the runaway favorite in this MVP landscape, maybe step outside your bubble for a minute.
Right. No, I think, and this almost is unfair, but like if the Nuggets make the conference finals, or if the Nuggets make the finals, I think, and let alone win a title, I think then suddenly it's just no one is going to ever again be like, that was weird when Jokic won 3 MVPs. And like the finals and the playoffs don't even factor in whatsoever. It's just, and I go down this road too. Like, your playoff performance is sort of a validation of like how good we thought you were in the regular season, because it's a little different. It's harder. It's, you know, the demands are greater, but it's like, if he wins a title, then like it's game on. He might win 5 MVPs, because the biggest argument against him right now is like, that's a little crazy that this guy is going to win a bunch of MVPs in a row. That won't matter anymore. And it doesn't seem like that should be a consideration, but 100% will be.